There are a few things you learn by the time you hit 72. You learn that your knees will predict the weather better than any meteorologist. You learn that a good book and a quiet afternoon are worth more than most of the ambitions you chased in your 30s. And you learn that loneliness is a quiet predator. It doesn't roar, it just settles in, a fine layer of dust on everything you own, on everything you are. My name is Warren, and for 45 years I was an investigative journalist. I was the guy who asked the hard questions, who followed the money, who believed that if you just dug deep enough, the truth was always waiting. But after my wife Martha passed, the silence in our house became a physical presence. The questions stopped. There was no one left to answer them. That's when I met Isabella, or rather, the person I thought was Isabella. It started, as these things so often do, with a simple, harmless message online, a shared interest in classic literature, a witty back and forth that felt like a light being switched on in a dark room. For the first time in years, I felt like myself, the man I was before the quiet set in. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, a 72-year-old man, a journalist no less, fell for a romance scam. And you're right. I did. It cost me $175,000, a significant piece of the nest egg Martha and I had built, brick by painful brick. But the money, as much as it stung, wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the pity. It was the look in my son David's eyes, that awful, condescending mixture of concern and disappointment. It was the way his wife, Karen, started speaking to me in that slow, deliberate tone you use for a toddler or a golden retriever. They saw a victim, a foolish old man who needed to be managed. But they forgot who I was. They forgot that for my entire career, I wasn't the one who got played. I was the one who uncovered the players. So while they were busy looking up retirement communities and talking about power of attorney, I went back to work. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a source. And I was about to break one last story. This is the story of how I took back more than just my money. It's the story of how I took back my name. The call that broke the spell came on a Tuesday morning. The sky outside was that flat, unforgiving gray that promises a cold rain. I was holding a coffee mug, one of the cheap ones from the diner Martha and I used to frequent, the one with a cartoon fish on it that said "Hooked on You." Isabella, my Isabella, with her supposed Tuscan villa and her heartbreaking story of a sick daughter needing experimental treatment in the States, was supposed to be landing at JFK that afternoon. The final $75,000 I'd sent was for the private medevac flight. It had cleaned me out, but the thought of finally meeting her, of holding her hand and telling her everything would be okay, it felt like a worthy investment in a future I'd stopped believing I had. My phone rang, and it wasn't her. It was a man with a thick, almost impenetrable accent, telling me there had been a complication. Customs, a tax issue. They needed another $50,000, wired immediately, or her daughter would be sent back. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, and looked at the fish on my coffee mug. And for the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel the warmth of the coffee. I felt the chill of the ceramic. The man's voice was urgent, pushy, but underneath it there was a script. I'd heard scripts before. I'd spent a decade of my early career exposing telemarketing scams. I knew the cadence. I knew the manufactured panic. And in that one, gut-wrenching moment, the entire beautiful, fragile world I had built with Isabella shattered. The loving emails, the late-night chats, the photos of a woman with kind eyes and a smile that promised warmth, it was all a stage. And I was the only one in the audience. I hung up the phone without a word. I didn't shout. I didn't break anything. I just stood in my kitchen and felt the silence rush back in, louder and more accusing than ever before. The silence was laughing at me. "You old fool," it said. "You bought a ticket to a show that was never real." Telling my son David was the second hardest thing I've ever had to do. The hardest was burying Martha. This was a close second. I drove to his house, a sprawling 2-story colonial in the next town over, the kind of place with a 3-car garage and landscaping that costs more per month than my first mortgage. Karen, his wife, opened the door. She has a way of smiling that doesn't involve her eyes. It's a baring of teeth, a social requirement she fulfills with minimal effort. Warren, what a surprise, she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that curdles milk. David was in the living room, watching golf on a television the size of my old Ford Escort. He's a good man, my son, but he's soft. Life has never hit him squarely in the jaw. I was always there to intercept the blow, to co-sign the loan, to front him the down payment for this very house. He looked up, his face a mask of mild irritation at being interrupted. I didn't sit down. I just stood in the archway of their ridiculously oversized living room and laid it out. The facts, the numbers, the name Isabella. I watched his face shift from impatience to disbelief, then to a deep, profound disappointment. It was the look of a man seeing his father not as a pillar of strength, but as a cracked foundation. Karen's mask of politeness dropped, replaced by a hawk-like sharpness. $175,000, she repeated, her voice an octave higher. Warren, how could you? That was for your future, for your care. She didn't say our inheritance, but it hung in the air between us, thick and ugly. That was the beginning of the fallout. The pity. Oh God. The pity. It was worse, 1,000 times worse than losing the money. The money was just paper. The pity was a judgment. It was a redefinition of who I was in their eyes. I was no longer Warren, the man who'd once had a governor on the ropes over a state contracting scandal. I was Warren, the senile old fool who sent his retirement fund to a phantom in Tuscany. They descended on my life like well-meaning vultures. Karen started by helping in my kitchen, rearranging my cupboards, putting sticky notes on things, as if I'd forget what a can opener was for. "We just want to make this easier for you, Dad," David would say, his hand on my shoulder, his touch feeling less like comfort and more like a restraint. They sat me down at my own dining room table for what they called a family meeting. It was an intervention. They had pamphlets. One was for a grief counseling group. The other was for a senior living facility called Golden Meadows. It had a picture of a smiling, silver-haired couple playing shuffleboard on the cover. They talked about consolidating my bank accounts, about David taking over my finances as a joint signatory, just to be safe. Karen had a whole speech prepared about how these scammers are professionals, how they prey on the vulnerable, and she kept using that word vulnerable. "There's no shame in it, Warren," she said, her voice oozing a synthetic sympathy. "It happens to people in your condition. My condition was that I had been lonely. My crime was that I had wanted to feel something again. Their diagnosis was that my mind was failing. I remember one night, about a week after the disastrous family meeting, I was staring at my computer, at the old chat logs with Isabella. It was a form of self-flagellation, reading the poetry she'd quoted, the tender words she'd used. "My dearest Warren," one message began, "you have a soul that has seen the world but has not been hardened by it. That is so rare." I felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over me. How had I, a man who could spot a lie from a politician at 50 paces, fallen for such saccharine garbage? Because I'd wanted to. That was the simple, brutal truth. I had wanted it to be real so badly that I'd willingly suspended a lifetime of disbelief. My phone buzzed. It was David. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was the catalyst. It was the spark that lit the fuse. "Hey, Dad," his voice began, full of that forced, patient tone. "Karen and I were talking. We've scheduled a consultation with an elder care lawyer for next Thursday. We think it's time to seriously discuss a conservatorship. It's for your own good. We're just trying to protect you from yourself. From myself." He was going to protect me from myself. He, the boy who I'd taught to ride a bike. The man whose first car I'd paid for, the son whose business I'd bailed out not once, but twice. He was going to put me in a legal cage to protect me. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The shame that had been my constant companion began to curdle, to harden into something else. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was cold. It was the quiet, methodical anger of a man who has been profoundly, fundamentally misunderstood. They saw an old man. They saw a liability. They saw a dusty relic to be put on a shelf in a place called Golden Meadows. They had forgotten I was a reporter. They thought the story was over. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was just getting to the good part. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about Isabella. It was about the narrative. They had tried to write an ending for me. A sad, pathetic little epilogue. I decided in that moment that I would be the one to write the ending. And it wasn't going to be a tragedy. It was going to be an expose. My pity party was officially over. It was time to get to work. My first move wasn't to a lawyer's office or a police station. It was to my basement. In a dusty corner under a stack of old National Geographics sat 3 metal filing cabinets. My personal archives, 45 years of sources, contacts, and the ghosts of stories past. My hands, which had felt so old and clumsy for the past few months, moved with a familiar purpose. I was looking for a specific file, a story I'd done in the late 90s about international money laundering. It wasn't digital. It was paper. It was my brain, externalized, and in it I found what I was looking for, the name and number of a man named Frank Costello. No, not the mobster. This Frank was a forensic accountant, a certified genius when it came to following digital money. He was retired now, living somewhere in Arizona, but we'd kept in touch with the occasional Christmas card. Frank was the kind of guy who saw the world not as people and places, but as a series of ledgers and transactions. He saw the story in the numbers. I needed him to read the numbers of my humiliation. Frank answered on the second ring, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Warren, you old son of a gun. I figured you'd be dead by now." That was Frank's way of saying hello. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him the whole sordid story. I expected him to laugh, to call me a fool. He did neither. He just listened. When I was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. "Okay, Warren," he finally said. "This isn't a romance, it's a business. And every business has a paper trail. Send me everything you have. The wire transfer receipts, the bank names, the account numbers, all of it. Don't leave anything out." For the first time in months I felt a flicker of the old fire. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about curiosity, the core instinct of a reporter. I wanted to know how the trick was done. While Frank got to work on the financial archaeology, I started on the human element. I went back to the emails, the chat logs. I printed every single one, hundreds of pages, and laid them out on my dining room table, the same table where my son had tried to sentence me to Golden Meadows. I treated it like any other investigation. I started a timeline. I cross-referenced dates, times, and a recurring cast of characters in Isabella's stories: the sick daughter, Sophia, the greedy Italian relatives, the corrupt customs official. Then I went to the photos. She had sent me dozens. Photos of her in a beautiful garden. Photos of her by the sea. Photos of her daughter in a hospital bed. I had saved every one. I started with a simple reverse image search, a tool that hadn't even existed for most of my career. The results came back in seconds. The woman I knew as Isabella, the woman whose face I had stared at for hours, was a German lifestyle blogger. Her photos had been stolen and repurposed. The kind eyes, the warm smile, it was all stock photography for a life I had desperately wanted to buy into. The discovery didn't even hurt. It was just a fact. A clue. The next photo was the one of her daughter, Sophia, supposedly wasting away in a hospital. The reverse image search on that one led me to a news article from a British tabloid from 3 years prior. It was a story about a little girl who had made a miraculous recovery from leukemia. Her name wasn't Sophia. The photo was real, but the context was a lie. These scammers weren't just thieves, they were ghouls, mining other people's pain and joy for their own profit. This was the moment the mission changed. The cold, methodical anger began to heat up. This wasn't just about my money or my pride anymore. It was about the little girl in that photo, and the German blogger, and God knows how many other people whose lives had been strip-mined to create this fiction. It was about the sheer cynical ugliness of it all. A week later, Frank called back. "Got it," he said. "No preamble. It's a classic Hawala-style operation, but with a digital twist. Your money went from your bank in Northwood to a commercial account at a major national bank. Standard stuff. But from there, it didn't go overseas. It was pulled out in cash. In chunks. Always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. Classic smurfing. But the account it went to, that's the interesting part. It's registered to a shell corporation, a limited liability company called Blue Wave Logistics LLC. He'd scribbled the name down on a legal pad. "What's Blue Wave Logistics?" I asked. "On paper, they import and export artisanal soaps. In reality, it's a ghost. The address is a post office box in Kent, 2 towns over from you. The LLC was formed 6 months ago. The registered agent and sole officer is a woman named Sarah Jenkins." Frank paused. "Warren, this Sarah Jenkins, she's your money mule. She's the local connection. The scammers in Mumbai, or Lagos or wherever they are, they need boots on the ground to get the money out of the official banking system and turn it into something untraceable, usually crypto. This woman is their gear in the machine. Kent. Not Tuscany. Not Mumbai. Kent. A 30-minute drive from my house. The whole elaborate international romance, the drama, the heartbreak. It all came down to a post office box in a town known for its annual pumpkin festival. The absurdity of it was almost comical. I thanked Frank, telling him I'd let him know what the police did with the information. That was a lie, of course. The police would take a report. They would add it to a stack of 1,000 other reports. They'd tell me these operations are almost impossible to prosecute, that the money was long gone. They would see it as a closed case. I saw it as a lead. Now I had a name. Sarah Jenkins. The next step was second nature to me. I went to the county clerk's office website. Public records. Deeds, liens, court filings. You'd be amazed what you can find out about a person with a few clicks if you know where to look. I found her. Sarah Jenkins, age 34. A string of addresses over the past few years, all of them low-rent apartments. A few traffic violations. And then, the jackpot. A recent eviction notice from a landlord for non-payment of rent, filed 6 months ago, right before Blue Wave Logistics LLC was created. Then a more recent filing, a custody dispute with her ex-husband. In his petition he claimed she was unemployed and had no stable source of income to care for their 2 young children. Her response, filed just 2 months ago, stated she had a new successful work-from-home business in international logistics. Blue Wave Logistics. She wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, and they are often just as much a victim as the primary target. This complicated things. It made my righteous anger feel a little less righteous. But I needed to be sure. I needed to see her. The court filings listed her current address, apartment 2B, at the Oakwood Arms complex, on the dingy side of Kent. I knew the place. I'd covered a fire there 20 years ago. The next morning, I drove there in my old B. I parked across the street and just watched. For 2 days I sat there for hours, a thermos of coffee on the seat next to me, my old binoculars in my lap. It felt like putting on a comfortable old coat. The stakeout. The patience. The waiting. I saw her come and go. She was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a slump to her shoulders. She drove a beat-up sedan with a car seat in the back. Twice a day she would leave, drive to a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi, and sit there for an hour with a laptop. Then she'd go to the bank, the same national bank Frank had identified, and come out a few minutes later with a thick envelope she'd shove in her wallet. She was the mule, no doubt about it. While Frank got to work on the financial archaeology, I started on the human element. I went back to the emails, the chat logs. I printed every single one, hundreds of pages, and laid them out on my dining room table, the same table where my son had tried to sentence me to Golden Meadows. I treated it like any other investigation. I started a timeline. I cross-referenced dates, times, and a recurring cast of characters in Isabella's stories: the sick daughter, Sophia, the greedy Italian relatives, the corrupt customs official. Then I went to the photos. She had sent me dozens. Photos of her in a beautiful garden, photos of her by the sea, photos of her daughter in a hospital bed. I had saved every one. I started with a simple reverse image search, a tool that hadn't even existed for most of my career. The results came back in seconds. The woman I knew as Isabella, the woman whose face I had stared at for hours, was a German lifestyle blogger. Her photos had been stolen and repurposed. The kind eyes, the warm smile, it was all stock photography for a life I had desperately wanted to buy into. The discovery didn't even hurt. It was just a fact. A clue. The next photo was the one of her daughter, Sophia, supposedly wasting away in a hospital. The reverse image search on that one led me to a news article from a British tabloid from 3 years prior. It was a story about a little girl who had made a miraculous recovery from leukemia. Her name wasn't Sophia. The photo was real, but the context was a lie. These scammers weren't just thieves, they were ghouls, mining other people's pain and joy for their own profit. This was the moment the mission changed. The cold, methodical anger began to heat up. This wasn't just about my money or my pride anymore. It was about the little girl in that photo, and the German blogger, and God knows how many other people whose lives had been strip-mined to create this fiction. It was about the sheer cynical ugliness of it all. A week later, Frank called back. "Got it," he said. No preamble. "It's a classic Hawala-style operation, but with a digital twist. Your money went from your bank in Northwood to a commercial account at a major national bank. Standard stuff. But from there, it didn't go overseas. It was pulled out in cash, in chunks. Always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. Classic smurfing. But the account it went to, that's the interesting part. It's registered to a shell corporation, a limited liability company called Blue Wave Logistics LLC. I scribbled the name down on a legal pad. "What's Blue Wave Logistics?" I asked. "On paper, they import and export artisanal soaps. In reality, it's a ghost. The address is a post office box in Kent, 2 towns over from you. The LLC was formed 6 months ago. The registered agent and officer is a woman named Sarah Jenkins." Frank paused. "Warren, this Sarah Jenkins, she's your money mule. She's the local connection. The scammers in Mumbai or Lagos or wherever they are, they need boots on the ground to get the money out of the official banking system and turn it into something untraceable, usually crypto. This woman is their gear in the machine. Kent, not Tuscany. Not Mumbai. Kent, a 30-minute drive from my house. The whole elaborate international romance, the drama, the heartbreak. It all came down to a post office box in a town known for its annual pumpkin festival. The absurdity of it was almost comical. I thanked Frank, telling him I'd let him know what the police did with the information. That was a lie, of course. The police would take a report. They would add it to a stack of 1,000 other reports. They'd tell me these operations are almost impossible to prosecute, that the money was long gone. They would see it as a closed case. I saw it as a lead. Now I had a name. Sarah Jenkins. The next step was second nature to me. I went to the county clerk's office website, public records, deeds, liens, court filings. You'd be amazed what you can find out about a person with a few clicks if you know where to look. I found her. Sarah Jenkins, age 34, a string of addresses over the past few years, all of them low-rent apartments. A few traffic violations, and then the jackpot. A recent eviction notice from a landlord for non-payment of rent, filed 6 months ago, right before Blue Wave Logistics LLC was created. Then a more recent filing, a custody dispute with her ex-husband. In his petition, he claimed she was unemployed and had no stable source of income to care for their 2 young children. Her response, filed just 2 months ago, stated she had a new successful work-from-home business in international logistics. Blue Wave Logistics. She wasn't a criminal mastermind, she was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, and they are often just as much a victim as the primary target. This complicated things. It made my righteous anger feel a little less righteous. But I needed to be sure. I needed to see her. The court filings listed her current address, apartment 2B, at the Oakwood Arms complex, on the dingy side of Kent. I knew the place. I'd covered a fire there 20 years ago. The next morning, I drove there in my old Buick. I parked across the street and just watched. For 2 days I sat there for hours, a thermos of coffee on the seat next to me, my old binoculars in my lap. It felt like putting on a comfortable old coat. The stakeout, the patience, the waiting. I saw her come and go. She was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a slump to her shoulders. She drove a beat-up sedan with a car seat in the back. Twice a day, she would leave, drive to a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi, and sit there for an hour with a laptop. Then she'd go to the bank, the same national bank Frank had identified, and come out a few minutes later, with a thick envelope she'd shove in her wallet. She was the mule, no doubt about it. Meanwhile, Leo and I were doing our homework on Sarah Jenkins. We spent 3 more days parked in different spots around her apartment complex, mapping her routine. She left at 8:15 a.m. to drop her kids at school. She went to the coffee shop from 9 o'clock to 10:30. She hit the bank or the Bitcoin ATM around 11 o'clock. She was home by noon. We also dug into her online presence. She had a public social media profile, mostly filled with pictures of her 2 kids, a boy around 8 and a girl around 6. There were posts about struggling to pay for school supplies, worries about a broken hot water heater. It wasn't the profile of a hardened criminal. It was a diary of desperation. This presented a moral quandary. I wasn't just going after a faceless scammer anymore. I was targeting a mother who was clearly in a tight spot. Leo brought it up one afternoon as we sat in my car, the smell of stale coffee filling the air. "Warren, are you sure about this? I mean, look at her. She's got 2 kids. If we blow this up, she could lose them. She'll go to jail." I'd be lying if I said it didn't weigh on me. In my younger days, the story was everything. The human cost was just collateral damage, a necessary byproduct of exposing the truth. But I was older now. I understood the shades of gray. "She's still a part of the machine, Leo." I said, more to convince myself than him. "She's the gear that makes the whole thing turn." People like her are what allow the real monsters in Mumbai to operate with impunity. She made a choice. She chose to take money from people like me. Maybe she was desperate, but so are a lot of people who don't decide to become money mules for an international crime syndicate. But even as I said it, I knew my plan had to adapt. My initial idea of a big, splashy expose, of catching her red-handed and plastering her face all over the internet, felt wrong. It was punching down. My fight wasn't really with her. It was with the people who exploited her desperation. And it was with the people who saw me as nothing more than a doddering old fool. Sarah Jenkins wasn't the end goal. She was the key. My focus shifted. I didn't just want to expose her. I wanted to turn her. I wanted her to become my source, my inside man, or woman, as it were. I needed her to give me the details of the operation, the names, the methods, the communication channels. That was a much bigger story. A story that could actually do some good, that could dismantle the network, not just knock out one small cog. And it offered her a way out that wasn't a jail cell. If she cooperated with me, and then with the authorities, she might be treated as a witness, instead of a defendant. It was a better plan, a more sophisticated plan. It was the kind of plan a real journalist would make. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about a story that mattered. The silent takeover of my own life came to a head the day before Leo and I planned to visit Sarah. I received a certified letter in the mail. It was from an attorney, the one Karen and David had consulted. It was a formal notification of their intent to file for an emergency conservatorship, citing my recent significant financial mismanagement and my refusal to communicate, which they painted as evidence of a deteriorating mental state. They were coming for me, legally, and with full force. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. I picked up my burner phone and called David. He answered immediately, his voice a tense mix of relief and anger. "Dad, where have you been?" "We've been worried sick," I cut him off. My voice was calm, flat, and devoid of any emotion. "David, I received a letter from your lawyer. I want to have a meeting. Tomorrow morning. At my house, 10 o'clock. You, me, and Karen. No lawyers, just us." There was a surprised silence on his end. He didn't expect a summons. Yeah, of course, Dad. We can be there." "Good," I said, and hung up. The board was set. All the pieces were in position. The panic wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the people who thought they held all the cards. They had no idea I had been dealing from a completely different deck. The morning of the reckoning was crisp and bright, the kind of early autumn day that feels full of possibilities. Leo was due to meet me at 11:30 after my family meeting for our trip to Kent. First, I had to deal with the home front. At precisely 10 o'clock, David's oversized SUV pulled into my driveway. He and Karen walked up the path with the grim, determined faces of executioners who believed they were performing a murder. I let them in and gestured to the dining room table. I had 3 folders laid out, one for each of us. I remained standing. "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. They exchanged a look, a flicker of uncertainty, crossing their faces. This wasn't the confused, defeated father they had been expecting. They sat. "I got your letter," I began. My voice even, a petition for conservatorship. "It's a bold move. It alleges I am mentally incompetent and unable to manage my own affairs." David started to speak, the usual script ready on his lips. "Dad, it's not like that. We're just trying to." I held up a hand and he fell silent. "Let me finish. In this folder in front of you," I said, tapping the one in the middle, "you will find a complete record of the scam that was perpetrated against me. The wire transfers, the fake photos, the chat logs. It's all there. It's embarrassing. And I was a fool. I will own that. I was lonely, and I made a mistake, a very expensive one." Karen nodded, a look of vindication on her face. "Warren, that's all we're saying. You need help." "I'm not finished," I said, my voice dropping a little, gaining a harder edge. "Now, in the folder in front of David, you will find a different set of documents. This is a report from a private security firm, detailing the keylogging software that was installed on my personal computer 2 months ago. It traces the installation to your home IP address, David. It's a felony, you know. Unlawful access to a computer system. Carries a sentence of up to 5 years. The color drained from David's face. He looked like he'd been slapped. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. She stared at her husband, a look of pure, unadulterated fury in her eyes. "And in Karen's folder," I continued, my voice still unnervingly calm, "is a financial summary. It details the $40,000 I gave you for the down payment on this house, a gift I was happy to give. It also details the $75,000 I loaned to David's consulting business 5 years ago to keep it from going bankrupt, a loan which has never been repaid. And it includes the $60,000 second mortgage I co-signed on for your house, which makes me legally liable if you default. All told, you are in my debt financially and morally to the tune of $175,000. Exactly the amount I lost to the scammer. Isn't that a funny coincidence?" The silence in the room was absolute. It was a beautiful, perfect silence. The pity was gone. The condescension was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard truth laid bare on my dining room table. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, leaning forward, my hands flat on the table. "The petition for conservatorship is going to be withdrawn. Immediately. Today, you are going to sign a document, which my lawyer will be sending you this afternoon, acknowledging the $75,000 loan and agreeing to a repayment schedule. You will also begin the process of refinancing your home to get my name off the mortgage. I am severing all financial ties to you. From this day forward, you are on your own." David was speechless, his face pale and clammy. It was Karen who finally found her voice, and it was dripping with venom. "You would do this to your own son? After everything? You get tricked by some internet prostitute, and you take it out on your family? Family?" I let out a short, harsh laugh. "A family doesn't try to have its patriarch declared mentally incompetent to get control of his assets. A family doesn't spy on him. A family doesn't treat him like a child the moment he shows a sign of weakness. You two saw an opportunity. You saw a wounded animal, and instead of helping it, you decided to put it down and claim its territory. The pity, the concern, it was all a lie. It was a power play. And you lost." I walked over to the front door and opened it. "The meeting is over. I have another appointment." They sat there for a moment, stunned into immobility. Then David, looking 10 years older, slowly stood up, gathered his folder, and walked out without looking at me. Karen snatched her oars, gave me a look of pure hatred that I will carry with me to my grave, and followed him. As their SUV sped out of my driveway, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The family exodus was complete. It wasn't them leaving me. It was me, finally, leaving them. At precisely 11:30, Leo pulled up. He had his camera bag over his shoulder, his face a mixture of excitement and nerves. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Productive," I said, a grim smile on my face. "Let's go see about our story." The drive to Kent was quiet. I was running the plan over and over in my head. This was it. The culmination of weeks of work. We parked a street away from the Oakwood Arms and walked the rest of the way, Leo slightly behind me, his camera down at his side but ready. We walked up the cracked concrete steps to the second floor. The air in the breezeway smelled of stale cigarette smoke and boiled cabbage. Apartment 2B. The door was painted appealing, puke green color. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and knocked. 3 firm, decisive raps. It wasn't the knock of a victim. It was the knock of a man who had a few questions. For my final story. The door opened a crack, held by a cheap brass chain. A single wary eye peered out. It was her, Sarah Jenkins. "Yes?" she asked, her voice thin and nervous. "My name is Warren Miller," I said, my voice steady. "I'm a reporter, and I think you and I have something to talk about. It's about Blue Wave Logistics." I saw the flicker of recognition, and then pure, unadulterated panic in her eye. The door started to close. "I wouldn't do that," I said, not raising my voice, but putting a core of steel into it. "You can either talk to me, or you can talk to the 2 FBI agents I'm going to call the second you shut this door. They're already very interested in wire fraud, money laundering, and international crime rings. Your name is at the top of their list. But right now, only my photographer and I know we're here. The choice is yours." I held my breath. For a long second, I thought she was going to slam the door anyway. Then I heard the metallic rattle of the chain being undone. The door swung open. The vindication phase had begun. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. A threadbare sofa, a television on a cardboard box, and a pile of children's toys in the corner. It smelled of baby powder and fear. Sarah Jenkins stood in the middle of the room, wringing her hands, her eyes darting between me and Leo, who had raised his camera and was now silently, professionally, shooting. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I want the truth, I said, taking a step into the room. I wasn't trying to be intimidating, but the small space made it unavoidable. I want to know everything. Who contacted you? How do they communicate? Where does the money go after it leaves your hands? She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't. They'll kill me. They said they would kill me and my kids if I ever talked. This was the moment of truth. My old school journalist brain was screaming at me to press her, to use the leverage, to break her down and get the story. But looking at this terrified woman, I saw more than just a money mule. I saw another victim, caught in a different part of the same cruel machine. I changed my approach. "Sarah," I said, softening my tone, "look at me. I'm not the police. I'm not the FBI. I'm a 72-year-old man you helped rob. You and your bosses took $175,000 from me. They used my loneliness against me and turned it into a weapon. But I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to offer you a way out." She looked up, a sliver of hope cutting through the fear. "A way out? You're a pawn, Sarah. A disposable piece in their game. When this all comes crashing down, and it will, they'll be gone. They'll disappear into the digital ether, and you'll be the one left holding the bag. You'll be the one who loses her kids. You'll be the one who goes to prison." I let that sink in. Leo kept shooting, capturing the raw emotion on her face. "But there's another way," I continued. "You can become my source. You can tell me everything. Help me write the story that exposes these people for who they are. We'll document everything, your side of it. How they roped you in, how they threatened you. We tell the whole truth, and then, with the story as your shield, you go to the authorities. You go to them as a cooperating witness, not as a defendant. You give them the whole operation on a silver platter. It's your only chance." She stood there, torn. It was a massive gamble for her, trusting the man she'd helped swindle. I could see the war in her eyes. Then her gaze drifted to the pile of toys in the corner. Her expression hardened with a mother's resolve. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Okay, I'll do it." For the next 3 hours, with Leo's camera rolling and my pen flying across my notepad, Sarah Jenkins laid out the entire operation. It was even more sophisticated than Frank and I had imagined. The contact was through an encrypted app. The instructions were always from a nameless, faceless handler. She was one of dozens of mules across the country. They had preyed on her desperation, finding her through a work-from-home forum for single mothers. They promised her a legitimate job, then slowly, insidiously, implicated her in their crimes until she was too scared to get out. She gave us everything: screenshots of the instructions, the crypto wallet addresses, the names of other forums where they recruited. It was a goldmine. It was the story. The day after my confrontation with Sarah, the first piece of my story, co-authored with Leo, went live on a major online investigative journal's website. It was titled, "The Man in Mumbai, the Mom in the Suburbs, and Me, Anatomy of a Romance Scam." It wasn't just about the money I'd lost.
Yeah.
It was about the entire ecosystem of the fraud. It had my picture, a stern-looking photo Leo had taken of me in my study. It had Sarah's story, her identity protected, but her words painting a vivid picture of the coercion and fear. It had Frank's financial diagrams, showing the flow of money. It was comprehensive, it was powerful, and it went viral. Within 48 hours, it was picked up by national news outlets. I was getting calls from television producers. The FBI's cybercrime division, which had probably had my initial case sitting in a digital pile, suddenly became very, very interested. Sarah, with a lawyer I helped arrange, walked into their field office with a full confession and a mountain of evidence. The new reality set in quickly. My phone, which had been silent except for my son's panicked calls, was now ringing off the hook. But the calls weren't full of pity. They were from old colleagues, congratulating me on the story. They were from other victims, thanking me for giving them a voice. The narrative had changed. I was no longer Warren the victim. I was Warren Miller, investigative journalist. I had defined myself not by my moment of weakness, but by my moment of strength. As for my family, I heard through the grapevine that David and Karen had withdrawn the petition. They were trying to refinance their house. I received the first check for the repayment of David's loan. It was for a paltry $500, but it wasn't about the money. It was an admission of defeat. They had seen the story. The whole world had seen the story. Their power over me, the power of their pity and their judgment, had evaporated. There was nothing left for them to say. The last time I saw my son, I was leaving a television studio after an interview. He was parked across the street just watching. He didn't get out of the car. There was no anger on his face, just a profound, hollowed-out confusion. He was looking at a stranger. A man he thought he knew, a father he thought he could control, had been replaced by someone else entirely. In a way, he was right. The old man, the one who would have forgiven him, the one who would have eventually let it all go just for the sake of peace, that man was gone. I had killed him to save myself. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. So what's the moral of this story? I suppose there are a few. First, if something seems too good to be true, it almost certainly is. That's the easy one. But the more important one, the one I learned in the quiet of my own home, is about how we let other people define us, especially as we get older. The world has a tendency to write you off. They see gray hair and a few wrinkles, and they start writing your final chapter for you. They'll call you vulnerable, or fragile, or a victim. They'll try to put you on a shelf. Don't let them. Your story is yours to write, right up until the very last word. The money I lost, I'll probably never see most of it again. But what I got back was infinitely more valuable. I got my name back. I got my self-respect back. And I got a damn good story out of it.
I'm not lonely anymore.
The silence in my house hasn't gone away, but it doesn't mock me now. It's just quiet. And in the quiet, I can hear myself think. And I'm thinking about my next story. Thank you for listening to my story today. I know there are a lot of you out there who have felt dismissed, or taken for granted, or have your own stories of betrayal, big or small. I'd be honored if you'd share your experience in the comments below. It's important for these stories to be told. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are a lot more stories that need to be heard.